Greetings, YouTube. Elaine on these back at you from right here at the Green Thumb Gardening Channel, right here in Grow Zone 8B in Tipton, Georgia. And in this morning's video, YouTube, in this morning's video, we're going to be harvesting a couple of cherry tomatoes from our cherry tomato plants here at Queen Annie's place, YouTube. But not only that, YouTube, we're going to actually be pruning our tomato plants once we conduct that harvest as well. We're going to be pruning our tomato plants, YouTube, first off to create better airflow here in the canopy of our tomato plants. That will reduce any risk of any type of disease setting in on the leaves of our tomato plants, such as blight, etc., any fungus or a mold, mildew taking hold here in our planter. But not only that, YouTube, pruning some of the leaves from our tomato plants will allow our tomato plants to put that same energy that they were putting into growing all of those leaves into producing more blossoms and more fruit here on our cherry tomato plants. As you guys can see, as I take you guys in, we have one cherry tomato there and another up there in that canopy up there, hidden back there in the back, that we're going to remove from these plants today. And after we do that, YouTube, and take a look at what those two tomatoes look like, I'm going to show you guys how I go about actually pruning these tomato plants to again remove a lot of the leaves, because my aim here is to grow tomatoes and not leaves. I mean, growing tomatoes, you like this, seeing a bunch of leaves on your plants, that's a-okay, but trust me, pruning your tomato plants helps a lot. Your tomato plants will love it if you prune them. They'll grow a lot healthier, they'll produce a lot more fruit, and there'll be a lot less risk of any type of disease setting in on your plants if you prune your plants and create better airflow through the canopy of your plants. We're going to do that right now, YouTube. Hang tight. I'm going to go ahead and get my camera set up here on my tripod so I can go hands-free here with you guys. Show you what we got going on here. So I can get you guys in a little bit closer. All right, I'm going to take go ahead and harvest this one cherry tomato down here from our plant. Show you guys what that looks like. You guys can see that. Get it up close to the camera. It's our first cherry tomato from here at Queen Annie's place. Another thing you guys got to notice about our cherry tomatoes, YouTube, is that for these to be cherry tomatoes here that we're harvesting from our propagated cherry tomato plants, YouTube, a lot of the tomatoes that's on our plants are much, much, much larger than these tiny two guys that you see here, YouTube. I mean, we actually have some huge tomatoes, if you guys can see that on these plants, much larger than any typical cherry tomato that I've seen anywhere at any time, YouTube. I'm not sure what's going on. Again, these are our propagated cherry tomato plants that we took and cuttings from one of our relatives' plants back during the winter months, YouTube, and propagated into the plants that you see growing here. And again, YouTube, these are some huge, huge, huge tomatoes to be cherry tomatoes. And what I'm going to do here now, YouTube, is go in here, and what I'm going to be removing from these plants, YouTube, is leaves, not the fruiting branches or suckers that actually produce blossom, which in turn into tomatoes, which is your fruit on your plants. I'm going to be removing a lot of the unnecessary leaves from these plants to open this canopy up. I'm going to show you guys how I go about doing that now. A lot of you guys are not going to like what you see me doing here, but trust me, YouTube, pruning your plants works. Your plants will love you for it. They will grow into much more healthy and vigorously growing and more productive plants if you simply prune your plants. I'm going to get started here and show you guys what I'm actually going to take off of this plant. I'm taking leaves, YouTube, off of this plant, and not suckers such as this part here that has the blossoms on it. Leaves on a tomato plant would never produce tomatoes. They only really purpose they serve is for photosynthesis and to shade some of the fruit on your plant, YouTube. You don't need all of these excess leaves on your plant to produce tomatoes. And again, removing these leaves will allow your plant to put a lot more of that energy that they're putting into these leaves into your fruit. So we're going to go down along this bottom remove as many of the leaves as we see that are, again, not our fruit producing branches. That's going to open up our bottom canopy, which will in turn allow our soil to dry out faster after we water it and after it actually rains here, YouTube. And that in itself will reduce the possibility of any bacteria or mold or fungus growing in our soil, which could in turn affect the health of our plant. So again, what we're taking off this plant, YouTube, is just leaves, not the fruit producing branches. They start here along the bottom. We're going to go along around this plant. You guys are going to see how this plant opens up as I remove a lot of these excess leaves and foliage from this plant. I know a lot of you guys are thinking that I'm just whacking this plant to death, and I am. I'm really whacking a lot of unnecessary foliage from this plant in order to give this plant more life. YouTube. A lot of you guys are probably thinking you're just taking way, way, way too much foliage from this plant. And I am. I'll admit I'm taking a lot of foliage from this plant, but I'm only removing leaves and not the fruit producing branches from this plant, which will in turn again make for a much healthier overall plant that can put much more of its energy into producing fruit than it currently is putting into growing all of these excess leaves, YouTube. Now, you guys should be able to see by now how this plant's beginning to open up as I remove a lot of this excess foliage from it. Again, this is creating better airflow throughout the canopy of my tomato plant, which will again reduce the amount of moisture that's held on the leaves and the foliage itself on this plant, which will again, in turn again reduce the possibility of disease forming in the canopy of my plant, down around the base of my plant, in the soil, etc. As you guys can see, I'm really going to town on this tomato plant, removing these excess and unnecessary leaves from this plant. And trust me, my plant will love me for doing this. Now, as you guys can see, this plant's really beginning to open up here in the center. As we remove a lot of that excess foliage. Go back down here on the inside. Most of the branches that's facing inward towards the canopy, we want to remove those because those again in turn are only clogging our canopy, reducing airflow, and creating an environment for bacteria and fungus to grow. Now, as you guys can see, or should be able to see by now, our plant is looking a lot different than it did at the beginning of this video, YouTube. That's because I've come through and removed a lot of the actual unnecessary leaves from the canopy of this plant and left mostly fruit producing branches here in the canopy of this plant. I'm gonna grab my camera from the tripod right now and take you guys back, bring you guys back in for a close-up and show you the difference in what the interior of my tomato plant looks like now as opposed to the way that it did it at the beginning of this video. And you will see why it's important to open the canopy of your plants and allow them the proper amount of airflow. Take a look at this, YouTube. Now, as you guys can see, you can actually see through this plant now, YouTube. Look at this plant. You see how clogged the canopy is on this plant? There's very little airflow traveling through the canopy of this plant, which makes it much more prone to disease and other things like that. When we get done with this plant over here, it'll be looking just like this plant over here. Plenty of airflow, still lots of shade for our fruit to prevent our fruit from becoming sunburned, etc. We're gonna go ahead and do that same thing to this plant over here, YouTube, and we'll bring you guys back and show you what it looks like when we get done. Hang tight. All right, YouTube, we're back. And as you guys can see, we now have both of our cherry tomato plants pruned and looking much more healthy than they were at the beginning of this video. As you guys can see, you can actually see through the canopy of both of our cherry tomato plants now here at Queen Annie's Place, YouTube. And they are both loaded as they have been all season long here at Queen Annie's Place. But after the pruning, YouTube, we're looking forward to much more fruit production and much more healthy growth from our plants here at Queen Annie's Place, YouTube. Again, prune your plants, YouTube. They'll love you for it. Thanks for watching. And if indeed you currently are watching this video on pruning tomato plants and you're not already subscribed to the Green Thumb Gardening channel, please indeed take this moment to press that subscribe button beneath this video, that like button, that notification button, and be sure, YouTube, be sure to share this video with your friends and family as well. Yeah, harvesting cherry tomatoes from Queen Annie's Place and pruning our cherry tomato plants for much more healthy growth and increased fruit production. Thanks for watching.